Thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming out today. I'm really thrilled to be here to do our annual address to talk about Metro Vancouver, and I want to give a big shout out to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade for continuing to host these wonderful conversations, whether it's with myself or others that in this room, to have these conversations. And at our table, we were talking about the role of media and social media during our lunch there, and that's today's reality, but this type of conversation is also part of what needs to happen, and we need to do, I think, more of these types of conversations. And I know many of you in this room are leaders in your own organizations, leaders within this region, and so I thank you for coming to have this regional conversation, but also challenge you to have more regional conversations around Metro Vancouver. We know that Metro Vancouver is uniquely situated. Well, we think we're unique. We also think that we're uniquely situated here in Canada. But Bing Tom, our friend Bing Tom, used to say that Metro Vancouver is perfectly positioned right between Europe and right between Asia. And we see that in our international economic growth that's going on here. But with that growth comes challenges. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Metro Vancouver, but also a little bit about some of those challenges that I think as a region and regional leaders, we need to all come together to address those. But first I wanted to start off with a unique video that myself and Mike Clay and Mayor Stewart of Coquitlam on opening day of the Evergreen Line, which was phenomenal. We were live streaming this off my phone, which was a phenomenal day, but it shows about regional leadership and working with other levels of government about how we can make major infrastructure projects happen, how that can open up communities, and Port Moody and Coquitlam have done a phenomenal job building density around stations. We saw with the Canada Line, when it opened, it was oversubscribed, and Malcolm and Richmond have also done a wonderful job with density around stations and continue to do that. So that was a huge opportunity for us in the Tri-City areas, but it also demonstrated what can happen when we work together and combining our efforts for these sort of projects. So our objective with the transit system is a broader vision. Robin talked about the Mayor's 10-year plan and what we're doing with that. But at Metro Vancouver, we also have many board strategic plans, because as you know, when you run larger organizations, you need to know where you're going in order to get there, in order to benchmark your progress towards that. And at Metro Vancouver, you can see our compendium of plans on how we're looking after all of those different assets. But we also know that as Metro Vancouver, over the last few years, we've also taken on roles as regional facilitators for conversations. Not saying that we're going to be the deliverer of a new service or take on more responsibility, but we're going to set the table to have additional conversations around this region. But we know that there's some challenges, there's some sticky issues that maybe don't fall with one organization or another, or one government level, or one local government, or one business community. They're around this whole region. And we know that we have a limited land base. And that's an important conversation for us to grapple with. And I know our many conversations with the port, but also with groups like Westbuild that's here, and Mosaics that's here, and developers, Ani that's here, are talking about how do we better utilize the land that we have as we go forward. But we also know that we have this low income, or this income gap that's happening. And we know that Metro Vancouver, according to Stats Canada, we're 23rd out of 28 regions within Canada that have, or the income to gap is the highest, right? That can happen. And the Greater Vancouver's economic scorecard also indicated that one of our major challenges here is around income and productivity. And so how as a region do we go over that? We know that our high cost of living, we all have lived and experienced and are continuing to experience the high housing costs. But for Metro Vancouver, ours jumped 48% in the last number of years compared to Calgary at 4%, Winnipeg at 6%. We're somewhat in competition with those markets in different areas. We need to figure out how collectively. We know that our CPI is the second highest next to St. John's in the country. So these are all issues that we have to figure out together. And as we grow, we need to figure out how we get people moving around this region. Our friends at C-SPAN won a huge shipbuilding contract that's going to be great for the North Shore, but it's actually great for this whole region. In fact, the first $165 million that they've spent to upgrade their yard The number one city that received most of the business, like businesses within that city, was Vancouver. Second was North Shore, third was Burnaby, and including the little old city of Port Coquitlam got $500,000 worth of contracts for that North Shore yard upgrade. But also, they can't find enough people to work there. They're having to draw people from all over the Lower Mainland and Fraser Valley, and it's caused a massive transportation issue with them of how to get people into their yard every morning. And they're being creative, but we need to figure that out, or else we're also going to hamper our economic growth as we go forward. So we all have a role to play in this, and I want to describe some of the pieces that I think Metro Vancouver is going to do as we look at this and the role that we're going to play. So part of it is around the prosperity of this region, and how does Metro Vancouver work on that? So as you know, Metro Vancouver is a large utility, one of the larger utilities here in the province, and for water and sewer, some of the largest utilities in Canada. And we can drive in economies of scale to deliver these utility services that we just couldn't if we were trying to do them individually, or we were 3 municipalities over there getting together, or one large one over there. We can have 5 sewage treatment plants instead of 22 of them. We can have 2 water treatment facilities instead of a whole bunch of them. And we can all get that economies of scale. And many of the national studies that we've done really demonstrate that economies of scale that we get at Metro Vancouver. And I want to highlight some of the costs, the expenditures that go with some of these massive projects. So we're doing, in our water division, we're working on a couple major projects, lots of major projects, but 2 that I want to highlight. A $390 million water crossing around the Second Narrows, which is going to be deep underneath so that it's earthquake-proof. It's larger to manage the growth in the region. We're also doing an Annacis Island water supply tunnel, $430 million that will go under the river there. And I want to really say thanks to the port, because these are obviously under the areas that they have jurisdiction over. We need to ensure that we're working closely, and Robin, with your team, has been nothing but help in working with these projects, and we really appreciate that proactive help in trying to solve some of these, because it's not just putting a pipe underneath a river or an inlet. There's logistics that are going on both sides. There's railways and all that sort of stuff that we have to work with all of our different partners on. So on the wastewater side of things, in 2017, we've started on a $580 million expansion of our Annacis wastewater treatment facility, which services about 14 municipalities around Metro Vancouver. And we are working towards finalizing our RFP on our Lionsgate sewage treatment plant, which is a $680 million project. We're really thankful that we got just over $200 million from the federal government for the Lionsgate sewage treatment plant. We're working hard on the provincial government. Given there's an election, hopefully there's some more announcements. We hope on that one anyways we get some announcements. We hope we get announcements on a whole bunch of stuff, and we don't mind, an election, give out money, that's good. Whatever, we just want the money, right? So, but moving, also the other big area that we look after is solid waste, and some of the projects that we're working on there is a $45 million replacement or a moving of our Coquitlam transfer station just down the street, as well as we're investing $6 million, and I apologize to some of our Metro colleagues that look after this, and any engineer in the room, and I do say that we've got some of our great engineering firms, Hatch is here and AECOM is here, that help us out with these. We're going to put in some new magnets into the waste energy facility. So we have some already that take out the steel and the iron, and we make about $1 million a year reselling that product so that it doesn't go into a landfill. We're putting in more magnets for any of us that aren't engineers. That's going to take out copper and some other metals, which will produce another $500,000 in revenue. So for a $6 million investment, we're going to make about $500,000 a year. So good financially, but also great to make sure that that stuff isn't going into a landfill and staying there forever. So beyond infrastructure, Metro Vancouver is playing a growing role in many other areas. The first one I want to talk about is around housing. And Mike Clay, who heads up our housing committee, is doing a great job leading Metro Vancouver in a new direction around housing. So in the past, and we will continue to, and our first priority is, we have about 49 housing projects around Metro Vancouver that house about 10,000 people a month in Metro Vancouver housing. we have this great business model that it doesn't actually take any revenue from property tax. It's a self-funding corporation, actually, the Metro Vancouver Housing Corporation, which is a great model going forward. But we're also as a board, have decided that we need to do more about housing to address some of those affordability gaps that we talked about earlier. So we have a new initiative around redevelopment, looking at the sites that we own as Metro Vancouver, and some of them don't have the density that they should have because they're close to a new SkyTrain station or to a Beeline bus. And so we're looking at that. We're also reaching out to our federation, our local governments. Do they have any projects? Do they have any land that they want to get redeveloped, but they don't want to be a housing provider? Well, Metro Vancouver can be that housing provider on their behalf if they supply the land. So we're looking at partnerships there. And finally, we just launched a regional task force on homelessness, led by Gregor Robertson and Nicole Reed out of Maple Ridge, to try to have a regional discussion of local governments about homelessness and what's going on and what we can do together. So it's not it's that city, too bad about that city, because almost overnight you could be that city. And so it's about how do we share information, how do we raise this conversation to be more important. Many of the other conversations around housing is working with the federal government on their national housing strategy, and we look forward to a meeting with the minister in the next couple of weeks around that topic. One of the ones I talked about last year was the Regional Prosperity Initiative and the work that's going on there, and I will say that it's going really well. We have a task force at Metro Vancouver, but we also have this steering committee and advisory group. Some of you in the room are on those groups, and we're meeting on a monthly basis to figure out what the pillars are, what the mission is, how it's going to be funded, and governance, and pay attention later on this year. We'll come out with that. But we're also looking at a couple initiatives that we can do together. So we're looking at how can we do a mobile business license around this region. So for all of the companies out there that are construction companies and they do business in 12 different municipalities and they're getting 12 different business licenses, we're looking to see if we can tackle that and bring that into one common business license, still ensuring that they have the right business license for each municipality, but making it more convenient for our customers. And we want to thank the Board of the Trade and the Chamber for pushing that item, but we also want to thank the TELUS for sponsoring that initiative financially so that we can move that ball forward. We're also working on a regional film permit, not the permit approval, but the permit itself. And thanks to the Film Association and the Motion Picture Association for pushing that and talking about how that's also important. It will be a key differentiator for this market in filming than any other market in North America outside of Los Angeles. So there's a lot of work going on there. And finally, the National Zero Waste Council, which Malcolm Brody is the chair of, is doing a phenomenal job raising the conversation, not just at Metro now, but nationally, and has pushing a national strategy around national food waste and looking at tax credits for companies and getting municipalities across the country to work with the federal government to do something so that we can reuse our food and not just throw it out. So Ian, I was thinking when you're doing the 4-chef thing, if one of the chefs could use like food that's best past its best date and that sort of thing, because the best before date doesn't mean that you can't eat it afterwards. It's still good, right? Yeah. Well, one of the things we do in one circle that I'm a part of, they bring chefs in and you have to cook something based on what you get out of a food hamper, right? And what can you cook out of a food hamper? So I think there's some creative ways to play with how we look at food differently, and we're hoping to be a part of that conversation. So on transit, that's a big file. We're moving forward with many different aspects on that as the Mayor's Council. It's not a Metro Vancouver thing, but it would be odd, I think, if I came up here and didn't talk about transit and what's going on in the region. We know that I think most of you will know that Phase 1 funding was approved. And around that, we're going to see a $2 billion investment into transit infrastructure and the operating costs to fund that. And we're pleased with what's going on there. There's 171 new buses. There's a C-Bus and more activity. There's 5 new West Coast Express cars, more SkyTrain cars, because if anybody takes SkyTrain, you know that you're missing a lot of trains if you're taking it in the peak morning, especially if you're around commercial. It will also have new bus hours in April, 5 new Beeline buses that will roll out in 2019. So a lot of wonderful things there. And it's going to start to connect some of those neighborhoods that are growing so quickly. We know in our sort of area of the world, we've got Westbuild and Mosaic doing great projects up on Burke Mountain, but there hasn't been a bus. Now there's a bus there so that we can start to connect people into the Evergreen line, which, by the way, when I take it all the time now, by the third station in Coquitlam by Coquitlam Center, it's standing room only in morning rush hour. So, you know, whether we thought, it's phenomenal how packed it is. And so I think all of this is leading to a real opportunity for all of us to think regionally and not pull out the, well, you know, south of the Fraser, north of the Fraser, the North Shore, this, and pointing all over the place. It's all about all of us. We got to figure out how we can put some of those things and leave some of our maybe politics or ideologies on some topics at the door and come together and have those conversations. And I think what really spurred that on was the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade leading the community. I hate to bring up the referendum because there's still scars in all of our backs on that thing. Well, they weren't in our backs, they were right in our face. But actually through the heart, mostly. But what was really demonstrated there, because transit and transportation is such a key issue to everybody in this region, when the Board of Trade and the unions and labor and academia and everybody came together and said, we got to work on this, we got to push this. We didn't get the result we wanted, but I think it was a breakthrough moment that the Board of Trade, frankly, could sit across from CUPE or from some labor and agree that there's a project we have to work on. We'll disagree on some other things over there, and we'll park those at the door. And so I think as we go forward, there needs to be more of that, and we're seeing more of that. And I think at Metro Vancouver, we're glad to participate on some of those tables, set some of those tables so that we can have the conversation, and maybe Metro Vancouver steps away as the conversation takes off. Maybe we continue to be a part of it. But there's a lot of things in this region that seem to slip through the cracks, and we always think it's that person's job to do it or someone else's job to do it. It's all of our jobs to do it. And that's the challenge I have for myself, and I challenge, frankly, everybody in this room about how can we do more together, because I think that's really what's going to get this region to excel where we think it should be, and tackle some of those sticky issues about income barriers, about affordability, about those sort of things. Together we can do that. So thank you so much again for coming out today and being a part of this. Thanks to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade of hosting it.